it is recording to the cloud, way up there in the ether, where only Punya can probably retrieve it later on. So I've known Punya for nearly 2 decades now. He was a student in Illinois, just over the border, when I was a early faculty member at IU. And people in Illinois and Indiana don't talk too much to one another, but we do a lot of faculty here at Indiana were from Illinois when I started, a whole bunch of them. They wanted to go to some really nice hilly country. And so when they graduated, they went to Bloomington. But now it seems like when the Illinois people graduate, they go to Michigan State for some reason. So, that's what's happening. And Punya is one of those people that did that. He didn't spend all his time at Arizona State. In fact, just a small portion. He spent a lot of time at Michigan State. Really good place. And so that's one of my first questions I have for Punya. But before we get to the Michigan State question, just want to say that if you didn't get a chance to read through his bio, it is amazing. If you didn't get a chance to read through his CV, that's also quite amazing. And he's got all these anagrams where he writes words one way and you turn them around and you get them another way, because Punya is a creative artist. He's one of the most creative people in our field. In fact, someone could nominate him as the most creative person in the field. He'd probably win the award, but I only have one vote. So you're all going to be asked to vote at the end of the show. We'll see if Punya comes up with something creative for us to remember the show from. So we're getting near the end of the semester. We're already in week 10 or 11 or something like that. It says week 9. Okay, week 9. And we only have 13 weeks in the class because this is a speeded up kind of class. So we're getting near the end. And I thought it'd be really good to hear somebody got a lot of energy, a lot of interests, a lot of creativity, as I said, as we got to this point in the semester to wake you all up. But I've also invited former students. I've also invited colleagues and friends, because I know other people want to hear from Punya too, because they're stuck at home during COVID times. And this is a way for them to get a little entertainment in the field without having to turn on the TV or the radio. So Punya, the pressure's on now. The pressure's building.
Yeah, you should set the bar low, so I just step over it. So yeah, so no pressure. Thank you. Yeah.
We'll go a little lower now. Okay, so Punya, you had from India to Miami of Ohio early in your career. Did you have any, so talk to us a little bit about India in terms of educational technology, because I know it's not a hotbed for instructional design, but it has changed since you were as an undergraduate back then. But you were more of a visual artist, I think, more in doing things with technology.
Yeah, so it's a weird, long and winding road. I think that it was, somewhere around 9th grade that I knew I wanted to be an academic. That much I knew. I thought that I would
be ninth grade? Everybody raise their hands if you thought so in 9th grade you're going to be an academic. You did, Chris.
Yeah, okay. No, I knew I wanted to get a PhD. I knew I wanted to be a professor. My grandfather was a professor, and I could see he was like old and doddering, but still was like really enjoying the work. He was a linguist and he was still working. And I said, this is kind of crazy, that curiosity, that engagement with ideas stays so far beyond. I was like, that's a great job to have, and then my dad was, in the police in India, and he just hated his job. And I was like, I don't want a job which I hate. And I was always interested in ideas and in science and art. And I just was voracious, just vacuum cleaner of reading, right? I'll read the back of a toothpaste if I don't have anything else to read, but in India, if you're good in science and maths, you get shunted into engineering or medicine. And I didn't want to do medicine back then. So I went into engineering. And if you guys want, I can share, Kurt, with you a piece that I wrote recently called My Favorite Failure, for a book that Ron Beghetto is doing. And I basically talked about those 4 years of engineering as taking somebody who was super enthusiastic, energetic, wanting to learn, and just stomping it out, just bludgeoning any energy and passion and commitment out of you, tests and exams and no caring for understanding. And, it was terrible. And so at the end of 4 years, I didn't want to stick with engineering anymore. And I said, okay, what should I do? And I said, I've always loved science. I've loved math. I've loved learning. I grew up watching Carl Sagan. I grew up watching Jacob Bronowski and Ascent of Man. Ideas have always been very important to me. So I said, okay, I'm going to make educational film. I'm going to get people inspired to. So I ended up joining the Industrial Design Center in IIT Mumbai. It's a degree in visual communications. And within weeks, I went from somebody who had no idea what the hell they were doing, what their future would be, to somebody who just fell in love with this idea of design. And I didn't know anything about typography. I didn't know nothing about design, but that field allowed me to take all these things that I was interested in, whether it's science, it's art, literature, art history. I used to, really, so all of these things could come together. And I got my degree there, but my passion for education always was there. And that's the first time I got to work on a Mac, with those old Mac SEs with the floppy disks and so on. And I got this insight in some inchoate way that something interesting was happening in that space in terms of how we can represent ideas. So started working with HyperCard and started, and it was like, wow, there is the potential for this interactivity, the potential for representing ideas. I worked with a professor in physics, creating these modules, interactive modules on electromagnetism. I made multimedia back then when, around the evolution of stars and, how they go from gases to explode, supernova and black holes and all of that. And I realized that I wanted to be in education. I wanted to be in this new field of educational technology, except that, there were no degrees for that in India, and I had no money. And so I applied to universities in the US, and the only university that gave me a scholarship, the assistantship was Miami, Ohio. So I ended up in Miami, Ohio. For a year, getting my master's in communications. I have an MA in communications on top of that. I had a friend who was doing his PhD in business at University of Illinois. He said, hey, it'll be so cool if you just come over here. So that's the only PhD I applied for, got into Illinois. And lo and behold, my friend left and went off to British Columbia. So that was that, right? But, I had a wonderful time in Urbana-Champaign, getting my PhD in that site, but most of my work was in EdTech. The web was just starting up. I had an assistantship at NCSA where Mosaic, the first browser, had been made. So I was working on training teachers on using the web back then. I remember Netscape going public while I was there, knowing that it had been built in the basement of this building. So really heady times in some ways to see this thing called the internet just come alive. And at the same time, when I've always been interested in sort of the history and philosophy of science. So I'm reading this book by the Ruth Bernsteins, who end up actually becoming colleagues of mine at Michigan State 6-8 years later. And they have a book called Discovering. And as a side thing, they just mentioned that there are more than 400 different representations of the periodic table of elements. And I had never known that. I thought Mendeleev's representation of what you see in a classroom, that is the truth with a capital T, because he could make predictions about properties of elements and so on. And then to see that chemists had been creating spirals and 3D representations. So using Macromedia Shockwave, which some of you may remember as a thing, and creating these plugins which would go into the Netscape browser, I created this software called FLIPS, which is called Flexible Learning in the Periodic System, which doesn't work anymore, sadly, because none of those things exist anymore. But basically, it allowed you to navigate across different representations of a periodic table, zoom in and zoom out. So you could see a spiral, you could see a 3D, you could see properties laid out. And that was my dissertation. I'd always thought that my dissertation actually would be in the field of biology, because biology learning or education, because I've always been very interested in and read a lot even now in evolutionary biology, and that's like just a side interest of mine, but ended up being about chemistry. And that took me to Michigan State.
So wait a minute, before you get to Michigan State, You had no backup plan when you went to Illinois. You had one plan. You had no
I
backup
no,
plan when
actually,
you went to Miami. You had one plan, a bit of luck.
yeah, to be fair, I had applied to two schools. My wife had gotten admission to Iowa State in the graphic design program, so I'd applied to Iowa State so that we could be together. They didn't offer me an assistantship. Illinois did. We had no money. There was no choice. She went to Iowa. I went to Illinois. That's what it was.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So I want to mention here, Jung Won is with us here from Auburn. She's a former student in the program who graduated in the mid 2000s, or maybe the end of 2000. Right around when Jung Won was here, a little before that, Ron Baguetto was a student in educational psychology. So you're writing a chapter for IU alum, for a School of Ed alum. So it's good to see IU graduates doing great things. And Ron's one of the most famous creativity researchers now in the country. So it's, so it's good to see people doing.
Well, Ron's a colleague now here at ASU.
And I'm glad to see Ron Ostin is here from York, the former dean of York University, who's doing tons of free seminars and webinars for Project North or Contact North in Ontario on Zoom and engaging in Zoom. So Ron, thanks for coming and joining. And thanks to Dadzi Amadado from Quebec in Ottawa. And hey, Ron.
Hey, Ron.
And you guys might know each other. I don't know. I think you might have met once or twice. So Dadzi, good to see you here. And Dadzi is the most famous thing is he drove his car once from Ottawa to drive all the way to Bloomington for one of my Saturday morning classes, and he drove back after. So he's kind of really committed to education. So Punya, what got you to go to Michigan State? And everybody else, your advisor went to Michigan State, ran.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
Flexibility theory.
So when
go ahead.
So Zhao went to State before I did. He left Illinois, before finishing his PhD, got a job at Willamette, worked there for a couple of years before he ended up at Michigan State. And then when I was looking for jobs, I applied. In fact, the funny thing was the one job that I did want was Arizona State. And so I kept pushing back MSU when they offered me the job, hoping that ASU would call me for an interview. They never did, So, but here 20 years later, here I am, right? So it's kind of funny. And I met the former dean and I was telling him that you didn't invite me back then. Look, you got me back again. So it's okay. So I had interviews at Rutgers. I had interview at UConn and at Michigan State. So Michigan State was the first one I went to. Then I went to UConn. And I just loved my experience at Michigan State. And this is, those of you who want to go into academia, talk to the graduate students. That was the most insightful advice somebody gave me. Like, apart from talking to the faculty, set up like a lunch meeting or something with the doc students. And you will get a vision of the program, which is very true and genuine. And it was genuinely my conversation with the grad students at MSU and in UConn that both at great schools, but made me go to Michigan State because I could feel there was this sort of energy in the doc students there, which I didn't feel at UConn. And that might have been just a function of who I met. But that's how I ended up at Michigan State. The advantage of Michigan State was that it is a very strong teacher ed program. And at UIUC, I really hadn't had much opportunity to work with teacher educators. And MSU really got me thinking very hard about what is it that teachers need to know. And Matt Kaler became a colleague. So the story with Matt is that he interviewed a year after me. He had a ponytail and earrings, and I hated him. And I was on the search committee, and I was so vehemently opposed to his getting the job. Luckily, I was like the weakest of the people on, in terms of power, being a newly minted assistant professor, that nobody listened to me. And Matt and I have had is easily the most fulfilling professional and personal friendship I have. I officiated his wedding. He is still a person, anytime I have any kind of a dilemma, is one of the first people I reach out to. We talk on the phone, quite often. And I always feel incredibly grateful to the people who were smarter than me and got Matt that job. And so the whole TPAC work and all of that, and we complement each other so well. quite extroverted. I am quite, I'm like I get excited by an idea and I just think that that's the greatest thing. And Matt is an introvert. He is, very analytic, very thoughtful. And so we complement each other very well. So I talk about our partnership as a hot air balloon, where I am the hot air and he's the ballast. And you
But
need
they might not know who Matt is in terms
Okay,
of
so Matt Kaler got
hang on
his.
a second. Let me just.
Right.
So at Wisconsin, he went to Wisconsin like I did. He
That's
was
right.
kind of a student right after I left Wisconsin. So he was like the lineage after me there. So just I don't know if you realize that, but I knew of him, and I knew he
Yeah.
was well respected by his professors at Madison. So Punya and Matt created something called TPAC, which people are sending me their articles that they've published on the TPAC model during the past week. Hey, this is, and so you can continue where you were left off, but my question related to that is, you become so known for TPAC. Are you trying to escape it now? But go ahead, go back to the front.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. So anyway, so this framework comes out, and so this is where I think we were lucky, we were smart. I had a website from 1999 onwards. It's kind of interesting to go back in the Wayback Machine and see my 1999 and early 2000 websites, what there were. So we had been working on this for a few years. There was a piece that we wrote for TC Record, which is where this diagram that Kurt is holding up comes from. And TC Record had a 2-year waiting time before your article would be published.
2 years?
2 years. So it came out in 2006. We submitted in 2004.
Wow.
And it was accepted like late 2004. But I had the article on my website, and people were downloading it and reading it and liking it. So by the time it came out in 2006, that piece had already circulated quite a bit. And then AACTE, which is the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education, reached out to us and said, we want to do a handbook around this. And so Matt and I wrote the first chapter, and this thing took off, right? And I was willing to write it. I mean, it's fine. You can cite me, as long as I always joke that if you spell my name correctly, you can, cite me. I'm happy with that, right?
Well, some people might not know what TPAC is. Most people will know. Jungwon, I'm sure, knows what it is because she uses it, but others might not. Can you briefly explain what the ins and outs of it are?
It's actually, good teachers always have understood this, that good teaching consists of, if you think about what knowledge teachers need to have, knowledge of the subject matter. So if you want to be a math teacher, you better know your math. If you want to be a music teacher, you better know your music, right? Music needs to be something that speaks to you. Math needs to be something that speaks to you. You also have, but we've all known experts in fields who are really bad teachers, because they don't know what is it to not know a domain. They have the curse of knowledge. So good teachers can take the knowledge that they have and they understand students, they understand student misconceptions, they understand the prior knowledge that students bring to the table, right? And so a good teacher takes that content and transforms it in ways that make sense to students. So Schulman was the first person to sort of talk about it more formally, who incidentally happened to be at Michigan State when he came up with the idea of pedagogical content knowledge. So this was pedagogical content knowledge. It's been around forever, as an idea. Matt and I, as we were working with these new technologies, realized that the representational capabilities, the interactive capabilities of these new technologies are another form of knowledge. Now, if you think about the way most professional development for educators used to be done, they used to give you a workshop on wikis or blogs with the idea that you would then integrate it in your teaching. What we said, that is not enough, that just seeing these as separate pieces doesn't work, and that good teaching with technology requires knowledge of the domain, knowledge of pedagogy, and knowledge of the technology, but not in isolation of each other, that they exist in this dynamic, interactive relationship with each other. So that became the foundation of the whole TPAC framework. And you can look on Google Scholar, people cite it, and I'm very happy about it. But honestly, that was a thing that happened along the way. My interest has always been broader than TPAC. And so if you see my work, I've done work after that around teacher creativity, still work that still continues. I've done work around designing systems, designing educational systems. One of my biggest sort of successes at ASU has been the design of a school, which my team worked with the school district for over 2 years to design a new model for what a school can be, which includes new ways of arranging adults in that space, new ways of thinking about the role that teachers can play, new ways of thinking about the role that outside people, community members can play. So that's something I'm really, really proud of. So that's how sort of my work has evolved over time. And I can go on and on, but I would rather.
Well, you haven't answered the question about, if you were on Star Trek's original episode, that's all you'd be known for is Star Trek. And so sort of you early on, you had this big hit, and it's not just cited a couple times in Google Scholar. We're talking the article, Technological Pedagogical Knowledge, a Framework for Teacher Knowledge in Teachers College Record was cited 12,172 times. What is Technological Pedagogical Content Knowledge, TPAC, in Contemporary Issues in Technology Teacher Ed, 5,100 times. So you're talking nearly, getting close to 20,000 times just in those two articles alone. So everybody who's on this planet who's studying teacher education with technology knows you for that.
That's true. And to be honest, I remember going to the site conference and giving a presentation about X and some topic, and there'd be 3 people in the audience. Post TPAC, there are 50 people in the audience. So even though my work has moved on, I think that it has given me a platform that people listen to me, which is cool, right? I mean, which is great. So I have no complaints about being labeled the TPAC guy, as long as I have the freedom to do whatever I want, which I do.
Well, Tim Berners-Lee had a few people at his poster session when he talked about the web, early on. So, the same thing. But
we'll open it up for questions really from people and let that be the flow of the conversation rather than my going on and on.
Yeah, so there is a question. Chris Devers has to leave or did have to go. I don't know if he's still with us now. Let me take a look here. Yeah, he had to head out, but he has a question. What excites you about the future of ed tech and what worries you?
That's a great question. I honestly have more worries at this point than I have excitement. I've been wrong so often about this thing now that I temper whatever I think with a lot of humility. I think about how excited I was about the web. I think about how excited I was about things like Facebook and Twitter and so on. And I see the social system within which this, even though I knew it, right? I knew that the meaning of a technology or its role is much bigger than what the technology does. I underestimated the power of, quote unquote, the broader social, political space within which these technologies exist. And it makes me worry a lot. I think about the kind of data tracking capabilities that we have now that can pinpoint each one of us. If somebody wants to pinpoint us and get information about us, it's not hard at all. So, you initially, if you think about it earlier, you had, pre-technology, like pre the internet, if you're walking on the street, there is the anonymity of the crowd. Now what we have is that we have the data of the crowd and the precision of being able to pinpoint a person, right? And that has so many significant implications for privacy and so on. Second, the ability of these companies through these sort of psychological ways of manipulating how we think. If you look at the whistleblower who came out of Facebook recently, that Facebook knew all along that Instagram was causing great harm to young adolescent girls. So the psychological implications of the amounts of money that are involved in this make me really worry about what kind of an educational or a social system we will be living in. That there is great potential in these tools, we all agree. But I don't think that we have developed in our Stone Age brains the ability to comprehend, the ability to control that are our worst, most base impulses, right? So we are seeing a lot of transformations happening politically in the world, socially in the world. I come from India where, the way these tools are used, I mean, it's leading to people killing each other, hurting each other. So I am relatively concerned particularly because I've been wrong so often about this, right? With the rosy. So I almost feel like I need to step away from these rose-tinted glasses and take a much more brutally honest look at it. Doesn't mean that I walk away from the field, but it does mean that I sound the alarm about it. And I say these are matters of concern that we need to be thinking about.
So we do have a question that's come in on the channel here, and please, all of you, 16 of 60 of you, put a question in. You have a chance to ask the guru of educational technology anything you want. This is ask Punya anything. So Bob Romer from the Marines will ask us. No, I'm not going to put him on the spot for a military question. He's got a general question that affects all of us. So Bob, go ahead. You're muted, but we'll.
There, just found that magic button. I'm getting a large push to introduce AR and VR, and obviously incorporate AI and all the good machine learning and all that good stuff. But I'm finding that the infrastructure to support it, number one, is not in place. But number two, I think there's a large misunderstanding of what can be done with it. And right now, I'm seeing it more as an object, sort of a shiny object that might have value in more of a training rather than an education piece. And I'm wondering if I'm missing something, Punya.
No, I don't think you are. I think that that's a pretty accurate representation of where the field is now. But I'm always reminded of, Faraday when he first gave his demonstration of electricity or electromagnetism back then. People asked him, what use is this? And he's like, what use is a newborn baby? That's sort of almost a wrong question to ask, right? If you think about electricity, it completely transformed the world around us. Everything from you could have light whenever time you needed, it wasn't dark and you didn't have to use fire, to communication, to all of that depends on that invention of Faraday. So that these technologies are incredibly powerful, that they can transform the way we engage with each other and the world in transformative ways, whether it be in medicine, whether it be in education, whatever the domain may be, or whether it be warfare, right? All of these things are so they are important and they're going to be huge. The question is really, and I just want to segue into the question that Christian has right after that, which is around this idea of ethics. And I have increasingly become very, very sort of sensitive to this. In fact, I have a podcast called Value Laden, where I talk to educational leaders about how they develop their moral compass and how it plays out in the work that they do. There is a great piece, I'm forgetting the name, who's the guy who does Beyond Human? Anyway, so he has an essay called something like, what if Zuckerberg had stayed on in Harvard and not dropped out? And he just gives a list of courses that Zuckerberg could have taken. He could have taken, courses on human history. He could have taken courses on political revolution. He could have, on social psychology and psychology, and maybe he wouldn't be taking these dumbass decisions that he does today, right? You have this largest company in the world run by one person. The whims, the limitations, cognitive or otherwise experiential, of one person. That's a problem. And so, yes, I think ethics and morals need to be not as a separate class. I think they need to be the foundation of every class that we take. What are the implications of the decisions that we take as individual educators, as leaders, as people who are in big or ways, shape or form, a part of this ecosystem, right? And this is not an anti-tech stance, not at all. The chance that I have this opportunity to talk to all of you, to engage in this conversation, is a really powerful tool. So I am not a Luddite, far from it. But I also feel that we cannot put our heads in the sand and think that things will just work out because human nature, right? No, there are broader social, political, cultural trends here. The way the internet, we experience it, is different from the way people experience the internet in China, the way people experience the internet in Myanmar. And we have to recognize that. And those are functions of the socio-political, cultural systems in place over there. And I think that
is coming to us from China, and she has a question for you, but I won't let her ask her question first, because I know Jungwon needs to leave at 7:15, and she has an important question. But before Jungwon, I want Christian to kind of make sure he's answered your question the way you wanted him to. So Christian, do you want to jump in here and explain what you're interested in?
Yeah, no. So I absolutely believe that ethics should be incorporated in every class, actually, because I mean, we're designing something in almost every class, even if we're learning about different, you know, historical methodologies and frameworks, we're still designing our experience. And so how can we design ethically our own experience? And that should be taught in every class. It seems that maybe, yeah, I just wonder about having a specific class for it, or maybe it's a class on what is that, dark design, or what? There's a group that comes and presents at the Bloomington IST conference every year talking about dark design. Sorry for the dog.
That's fine. No, I completely agree. I think that if you look at, you know, what was the name of the computers as social actors? No, there's this whole thing that emerged out of Stanford, BJ Fogg and this class, you know, and I think he came at it with absolutely the most noble of motives, right? But all his grads ended up going and working for these tech companies using these dark design, the psychological ways to make these tools incredibly addictive. I mean, there are A/B designs being done. Any moment you're on Facebook, you're a part of some 60 odd studies that are going on at the same time. We don't know that. I mean, so these industries are completely opaque to us. And those are genuine concerns.
Jungwon is next. Jungwon from Auburn.
Thank you.
And she studied communities of teachers in Korea, and goes to Korea when she can in non-COVID times, takes teachers to Korea to see what education is like in Seoul. But right now is stuck in Alabama. Isn't that right, Jungwon?
Yeah, but I love Alabama. So my question is related to grant writing. I think that as the Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation, and I believe you are providing a lot of advice to faculty related to writing a grant on innovative technology or working with other professors. Could you share some advice on grant writing or just collaboration with other faculty from an administrator's point of view?
Cool. Couple of things. One, you won't get a grant unless you write a grant, right? It's like hoping for a lottery that you'll win the lottery if you don't go buy the lottery ticket. So the simplest way really is you have to just keep writing. That, you know, you are going to get rejected a bunch of times. You don't take that to heart. You understand that it is a competitive field. There are lots of really smart people out there. But see around in your university what kind of supports are available. Every university wants its faculty, you know, to be able to get successful in grants. So they will have structures in place who might be grant writers, who might be people who do the budget. Try to go on, like, let's say if you're going to NSF, go on their NSF website and they have all their existing funded grants right over there. Find the ones that look like the ones that you are going to go for and study them. Like, what did they get right? What kinds of things are they saying that they do? You know, and try to capture some of that in your own work. So I think that's the first step, which is you have to apply. I know if you don't apply, you're not going to get it. First. Second, don't take it to heart if you don't get it first time, second time. That's okay, right? You'll be surprised how often the program officers are willing to talk to you. So send them an email. We feel like, oh my God, I'm going to take their time. No, talk to them. Ask them, what are your priorities going forward? And they'll tell you what it is. That's not a secret per se, right? If you can get a chance to be a reviewer, be a reviewer. That's a big thing, because now you'll see how the sausage is made from the inside, right? So that's a huge thing. So a separate piece is around collaboration. If you look at my publication record, you'll see, I think I have like 2 pieces which are single author of 3. I thrive on collaboration. I thrive on working with people. It's the best thing. However, for every collaboration that has worked for me, there are 5 that have not, right? Where I have invested a lot of time in writing or co-writing with somebody and it hasn't gone anywhere. And so you have to be prepared for that, because the interpersonal dynamics of working with people are very complicated. Matt and I worked well together because very early on, I realized that Matt did not have an ego associated with his ideas. He would send me such crappy drafts, you won't believe it. And I was surprised. I said, oh my God, this guy is so cool. He's sending me really crappy drafts, which made me comfortable sending. Not, the biggest challenge is like, I have to impress you. So Jung, if I'm working with you, I better get a good draft. Otherwise you're going to think I'm not smart enough or whatever. And what Matt did was completely remove that barrier. And this is my single biggest advice I give to all the students I work with. I would rather have a bad first draft right now or next week than a good draft 3 weeks from now. Because guess what? We will talk about the good draft and we will reach to the conclusion that, oh, we need to change all of this. So let's do, so Matt and I used to show this to my kids because my kids used to complain about rewriting. And I would show them the TC record piece must have gone through at least 30 significant revisions between the both of us before we submitted it. Because we counted, that's how we number our file numbers. It's always, it'll be whatever, TC record PM1. That means Punya Mishra worked on it, that's the first version. Then he'll do MJ2. That's, he worked on it next and it's, version 2. And so we have something like TC record PM32, which means we have gone back and forth in that tank 32 times. But that worked with Matt. It hasn't worked with other people, right? So I think finding collaborators to me is essential. They make the work fun. They make the burden less because you're just doing short bursts of work rather than spending all your time on it. But they are hard to come by because we are all unique individuals with our own idiosyncrasies. And, it's not like I'm a perfect writing partner, right? I'm not. So Matt and I had to find, like I would never write a paper with my wife, for instance. That would be the end of our marriage. We are great together in a lot of things, but not in collaborating on work. That's just too much tension there, right? So yeah, so you have to figure out with whom you work with, how. It's hard. I must just say that. I'm great friends with people whom I would never write. It just doesn't work. That's all.
You haven't had as much luck as I've had with collaborators. I don't think you've had 1 in 5, 1 in 6. I would say I'm about 50-50. Really
that's
good.
Good. No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
But it all just depends. But one of my collaborators is going to ask the next question, because Chi Lee's on a recent paper we have in press in online learning related to early childhood education. And about a year ago, I got an email from someone. Her name is Senam Aslan. She's a former student in our program, and she says, I'd like to work with you on it. And I says, I don't have time right now. What's the paper on it? And it's early childhood use of technology. And I said, well, how about Chi Lee? She just did a dissertation related to that. She's just graduated. So the two of them matched up. And about 2 months later or a month later, they wrote to me, please be on this paper with us. So they said, please. And so I ended up looking at it and editing a couple of times. And I said, oh, okay, sure. And then it got accepted. And we had a fourth author on the paper. And after about 3 months, I said, who's the fourth author? And Senam says, well, Senam's at Intel in Portland. And she said, oh, I didn't tell you. She said, that's the person who did the communication system for Stephen Hawking. I'm like, I published with a person who did, I'm like, wow, So you never know who your partners are going to be. She's a real famous engineer at Intel. Anyhow, so Chi is going to ask you a question. She's got a little problems with the technology coming from, is it Beijing? Are you in?
Yeah, I'm right now in Beijing. Hi, Punya. So glad to see you. Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Dr. Bonk for being able to put so many amazing people on the same team. Thank you for inviting Punya into this section. I'm so excited because when I got his email, I said, I'm right now doing a project using Punya's TPAC model. Okay. So my question is kind of related to that. Although I heard part you mentioned earlier that you kind of move on. I hope you don't mind.
Like I said, as long as you cite me and spell my name correctly.
That's for sure. So my project is because now I'm a lecturer of English as a foreign language at the Open University of China. So my project is EFL teachers' competence in integrating morality education into language learning because it's it kind of in response to government policy. So the EFL teachers now have to cultivate students' awareness of citizenship in their language class. And in terms of cross-cultural communication, they also want to have students understand and respect different cultures, as well as to be able to promote their own cultures. Drawing upon your framework, I want to develop a model that helps EFL teachers to assess and develop such competencies. Because your model have 3 interlocking circles, and they also have overlapping areas. Besides that, on the outside, you added extra domain that is contextual knowledge. My project is about, in terms of integrating moral education and language education. So the teachers have to know knowledge of both areas, and they also have to have respect pedagogies and technologies, etc. So my question, and also that what confuses me is I have so many elements to talk about, and I have to be sure that I put them in the right area in your model. At the same time, I also want to keep it simple and clear so the teacher can, it's easy for teachers to be able to use them. So what's your suggestion? How do I balance that?
So, are you seeing this as are these going to be professional development workshops, or are they going to be, what are they going to be?
Well, yeah. No, it's not. So first, I want to establish this model, and then I would like to invite teachers to this workshop and teach them how to use this model to access their current knowledge level, and then how to further help their to promote, to improve.
So, yeah, so what's interesting is I teach a lot of courses which have to do with TPAC and so on. I never start with the framework. I want people to experience it. So for instance, what I will give them, I'll give them some content, and I'll say, oh, what would be a short 2-minute video for this, right? And then give them the same content and say, okay, now you have to teach it to 5th graders. How would you do it? So you are what you're doing is you're allowing them to play. So if you think about it, there are these 3 dimensions we are playing. We have the content. In your case, the content is sort of fixed, which is this whole idea of moral citizenship development and language. That's your content. So give them examples of that and ask them to play with different tools and technologies, with different age groups, pedagogical approaches, small group, whole group, lecture, blah, blah, blah. What happens then is they start seeing the dimensions that they are playing with. And that's when I would bring the TPAC framework in. This is what you've been doing, and then it makes a lot more sense. So instead of starting with the model, so for the longest time, Matt and I, we teach these classes, we wouldn't even talk about the model. The TPAC model for me is a much more researcher's analytical toolkit than necessarily an educator's toolkit, right? But I've shifted in that, which is I now bring the model in, but the first thing I do in any of these workshops or classes I teach is have them experience it and let them talk about it. And then you say, this is what you've been talking about. And that's when you put the circles up. And then it's like, aha. Because if you give them the model first, they tend to essentialize the model and make it a thing, while you wanted them to experience it. It's like, if you tell a kid, like you're teaching physics and you give them F equals ma, they never truly understand force, mass, and acceleration. You have to first show them that you take a small object and you push it, and you take a big object and you push it. Then you say, what's going on? He said, oh, the bigger the force, the faster it goes. Okay, let's write that down. The bigger the object, bigger the mass, the slower it goes. Okay, let's write that down. And then you say, well, guess what? Newton said F equals ma. Now their instinct matches with the equation. So my suggestion would be bring the model later, let them experience first. And then the model, then they're going to not take the model as something that you're handing down from the gods. Here is a model. It is a model which reflects their engagement and understanding of the phenomenon. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah, that's great advice. So basically, I should develop this workshop more teacher-centered and practice-based, right? Yeah, thank you so much.
Is useful. I'm not saying that the model is not useful, but the model is useful when you understand the phenomenon. Because if you give it first, then it becomes the filter through which they really don't see the reality.
So it reminds me of, we had a project here in Indiana called Ticket, Teacher Institute for Curriculum Knowledge about the Integration of Technology, for 5 years. And we didn't develop the model until year 6 after the program ended, and actually we didn't want to teach them theory on the front end. We had them do all sorts of things. Then we taught them what the theory was about at the very end of the program. We tried the first year to teach you at the front end. It didn't work at all, but we learned a lesson.
It's like if you want people to genuinely understand constructivism, you don't want to give them a lecture on constructivism. You want to put them in spaces where they have to build things, break things, figure things out, work collaboratively, blah, blah, blah. Then ask them, what happened there?
Right.
They say, oh, this was really exciting. And we went wrong, but then somebody helped and collaboration. And it's, hey, you know something? There is a name for it. It's called constructivism. Okay, now constructivism makes sense. If you give it to them before, it's just another phrase. I mean, it's jargon. It's nonsense. So TPAC is jargon. Let them experience it and then give it later.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I would like to keep you on updated on my progress.
My email is
if you don't mind, I would like to have your advice on if I'm on the right track.
My email address is very easy. It's just punya@asu.edu. So drop me a line.
Thank you so much.
Some questions here.
Yeah, we have a couple, and I just want to point out that Renee and Chi were in the same program together, so they probably know each other, and probably haven't seen each other in a while. So, but we do have your article for this week. Just to mention, you have an article from you and Matt. The song remains the Back to the Future of Ed Tech from 12 years ago, and I assume that what the arguments in there still hold today. So when my students read that article, what Punya was arguing about in 2009 is probably still relevant. So you should read that article. Dazi has a question, and we have a second from Turu, and I don't know Turu. So Turu, I want you to introduce yourself. Are you part of Mark Kircher's class, or who?
Hi, I'm Taru Malhotra. I'm a PhD from York University, and Dr. Ron Austin's.
Oh, right. We met before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I didn't recognize that at first, but thank you for coming in here, Turu. We've met before AERA conference. That's right. Yeah. So what would you have for a question for Punya?
So my question is, thank you, Dr. Mishra. It's great to hear you and actually see you. It's an honor. I've been reading all your articles, and it's as soon as Kurt forwarded the email, I was like, okay, I have to see him in real life. So it's a very different experience to actually be able to talk to you. So that's great. So my question is that with your TPAC framework, would you have, like now post-COVID, do you think it changes anything if you have to remake another framework again, or what are the things that you would include in it?
Well, I mean, we have to understand, right, that any framework is going to capture certain aspects of reality and ignore other aspects. That's both the strength of any framework or any representation and also its weakness. Right? So that's why they say the map is not the territory, because if the map were the territory, then you wouldn't need a map because that's the territory. So the TPAC framework, what does it do? It says that the kinds of knowledge teachers need to have in order to teach effectively technology need to be blah, 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 overlap, all that. I don't think that necessarily changes with COVID, right? That aspect doesn't change. What possibly changes is, one, a teacher's acceptance or willingness to play with technology, because now it's that, dang, I have to deal with it, right? Anything can happen, okay. Second, it also changes the kinds of tools that we are talking about, right? So now it's all going to be network tools, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Google Classroom, whether so on and so forth. Now that's both a good and a bad side to it. So for instance, one of the things that I found is most of the conversations that have happened post-COVID, after the COVID shutdown and remote learning and so on, have focused on general purpose tools, right? So things like Zoom and Google Classroom and LMSs and CMSs and how do we get discussion and how do we get blah, blah, blah. What I have not seen enough discussion on is you are teaching high school math. What are the right tools to convey trigonometry or simulations and so on? So that overlap between pedagogy, technology, I don't see enough attention being paid to that. So if I had to do PDs for teachers now, I would say, what about your content? And what are the tools that best work with that content? So the analogy I give is like a pencil and a microscope, right? So a pencil is a tool that you can use in art class, you can use in physics, chemistry, but it doesn't matter. You're going to use the pencil. But a microscope is a tool which is much more attuned to teaching biology or chemistry or the sciences, less so for the arts. So what are the equivalent tools in this online world that are connected to the content? I don't think that we have paid enough attention to that. So if I had to do workshops, I would focus on that piece. I think a lot has been written about using these tools in generic ways in educational context, not specific to domain. Because teaching music, there are lots of amazing tools out there with their apps and so on, which music teachers need to be exploring. Science teachers need to be exploring simulations, so on and so forth, right? I don't think enough professional development has happened in that intersection.
Thank you. No, that's great. And I was wondering that, do you think in post-COVID now, since we are moving to technology, there is the individual level of, like you mentioned, that changes, like how each individual or each teacher is accepting technology or moving on to online platforms. Would that play a big role, that how different it is from one teacher to another? And do you think our professional development workshops should include that part, or how could they include that part?
I think that the biggest danger for any pedagogical move is when we think of it as being uniform. I think that as there is a strong tendency for uniformity in these spaces, even in face-to-face classrooms or online. I think that true, genuine teaching happens when teachers feel comfortable, have a sense of agency, have a feeling of creativity, that they can go and make changes, see things their own way, present it to students their own way. So anything that you do in a PD context that allows teachers to feel that agency, that allows them to feel comfortable playing and trying new things, is a positive. And the fear is the other way, right?
Parama has jumped in here and adds a point about contextualization.
Yes, I would completely agree.
Yeah.
So there was a question from Dodzi.
Yeah, we're running out of time here. And I have two short questions after Dodzi.
No, but that was a question we missed out on.
So Dodzi, jump in.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Dodzi, go ahead, Dodzi.
Go ahead, Dodzi.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, I have my question there. So I think Punya has read the question. So it's to know.
Yeah, read it for everybody. So.
Yes, if there is, from your perspective, as someone who has put in place the model we're talking about, so the TPCK model, actually, is there any relationship or any influence you got from the community of inquiry model? And that model is mostly focused on pedagogy for sure. But is applied widely in online settings in general. So I will be interested to know if there was an influence from that model when you putting in place your model.
What
No,
Dante's
there
not saying though is
wasn't.
Terry Anderson was a guest the first week of this class, and
Okay.
he's known for that model. So we've heard from him. So go ahead.
No, there really wasn't. But if you think about it, what is the TPAC model? It's a stupid Venn diagram. That's all it is. I mean, it's kind of shameful that my career is built on drawing 3 circles, right? I mean, it's kind of sad, but it is what it is, and I will take it for what it's worth. But the TPAC model basically emerged when we were writing the TC record piece, that how could we capture Schulman's pedagogical content knowledge and how could we build out of that, and circles. And I can share a link to a video where I talk about all the missteps we took to get to that model, where we went wrong. It's actually quite funny because I was insisting on a tetrahedral model, and that's how little circles came to be. It's a long and winding road, but kind of interesting that, and I think grad students should watch that video. Kurt, I'll send you a link to that, because it's a very honest appraisal of how stupid one can be and stumble your way to an idea. I mean, we tried everything wrong that we could, and I'm to blame for most of it. And it's kind of interesting, and I'm very honest about it. You know, it was Matt who kept pulling me back and saying, no, that's not going to work. And I wouldn't believe him till the data just wouldn't work. And so that was a place where the data kept telling us something else. And I would, for the longest time, resisted it till I didn't, you know. And so, yeah, it's an interesting story. I'll find the link and I'll share it. You might enjoy watching. It's a short 15-minute video, but it's a pretty honest replication of how it came to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So my 2 wrap-up questions relate. One relates back to Arizona State, where you are, and you're part of the Deep Play Group research group. I assume you're the founder. Every month, or nearly every month, for the last few years, the Deep Play Group has been involved in interviewing somebody in tech trends, published in Tech Trends, about creativity and their careers, more like an interview type of article. So if you get Tech Trends, you will see Punya along with Dana Hendrickson and other people from the Deep Play Group publishing in there. So you want to plug that a little bit for us and tell us what inspired it, and is it going to continue to go, or are you about run its course?
No, I don't see that it's stopping anytime soon. It's going to be, I think, our 10th year anniversary next year. I think we've been doing this for 10 years now. And it's been an amazing experience. So the Deep Play Group at one point used to be all my grad students and me when I was at Michigan State. Now people have moved on. Some people have wanted to continue. Some people have said, nope, we are done with this. And we just write a whole series of articles. 2 books have come out of it, where we collected these essays and made them into 2 books that Springer published. I don't know, we have like 20 plus authors we have interviewed. And those are awesome, we have a sort of a broad set of questions, and we ask them, how did they get into the field, blah, blah, blah. And we write a little piece up, and it's great for the students because they get to talk to some big names in the field. It also is, I think, over time has become a really good record of the work that different people do. And, and we have been we realized along the way that we were narrow. Most of the people we're interviewing were white men who had been working in this field for 30 years. And we're like, oh, we need to expand this up, So we start talking to people who are working in music and the arts and creativity. We talk somebody like Shakuntala Banerjee in England, who's doing this awesome work with youth and resistance and creativity in very impoverished places. So it's been a great experience, and I don't see us stopping anytime soon. There is no reason to. Every 2 months we get a new piece out. That's awesome.
So have you been in every issue or only every other issue?
We try to target every issue, but then sometimes life gets in the way. So I think in the last 10 years or 9.5 years, we might have missed 4 or 5 deadlines. Otherwise, we have met every deadline.
I'm seeing Chi Lee had to leave in Jungwon, and Maria's just writing a note. A lot of people are really happy and seeing some really useful information. My final question has to do with creativity itself. And this field of instructional design or learning design and technology or ed tech, whatever you want to call the field, is not known for being really creative oftentimes, has often created these linear approaches and pre-prescribed learning and more of a direct instruction approach. But you, on the other hand, does all these fancy multimedia Christmas videos that you send me, and all these creative visuals and the ambigrams and all this, what is it, ambigrams?
Ambigrams.
And so, you know, is there a place for poets, visual artists, actors, sculptors, painters, comedians in the field, in this field? Or is it, or is it just that it's your creative outlet for all the rough times that you go through, and you create this just as an escape? So also full knowledge here, Punya's co-host with me of the Silver Lining for Learning show every Saturday, and he does the visuals for it, because he says he loves to do the visuals, and he's really great at doing them. So is it just a creative outlet, or is there a place for people in this field? And how do they find their place?
No, thank you for that question, because I think that these are human pursuits. The arts, music, literature, learning, science, math, these are human pursuits. And by bracketing them in certain ways, we actually deny these ideas the power. So if I have any criticism of instructional design as a field, it is that. It is that instructional design as a field has thought about things being stepwise, linear, that you go through this, you can take a complex thing, break it down into steps. I think it works for certain things. I think it works for certain skills that you need to develop. But learning as a human activity, I hope that there are musicians and there are artists and that there are authors and sculptors who get into the field, because I think that's the only way that field is going to respect what this complicated thing called learning is. And I am deeply grateful for those 2 years that I got in design school, because they've completely influenced everything I do, And I think it makes it fun. It makes it engaging and interesting. I mean, this video that I just linked here, you can see that. I mean, it's a serious talk, but it's clear I'm having fun without, I can take the work seriously without taking myself seriously, right? So I think that's really important. I think, Kurt, you and I sort of share that attitude, which is we take the work really seriously, but we aren't stuffed shirts about it. Right. And we have enough stuffed shirts in our field. We don't need any more.
I'll take mine off now. So, I got pegged. I used to do 3-part skits at conferences as keynotes. And,
I know.
That's
awesome.
I was having.
That's what I loved about your talks and stuff. Like, you just do that.
When I tell people I don't do that anymore, they say, well, we're not going to bring you. So, but yeah, you can find your creative space, and you have to do that. And I've really appreciated the hour with you, Punya. And, it's been really enjoyable to have you come in, especially at this point in the semester for all of us. Renee's going to get the last word. And then Punya, then Renee will give the last word from our end, and I'll have you give the last word on your end. And we'll take we'll stop the recording, and I'll come back and talk about Constructivism to my students. We'll give about 10-minute, 15-minute break. So Renee and then Punya as the closing.
Hi, it's really nice to hear all about this. Your very informative insight. I have a really quick question about your next step, since you mentioned you have many things that you want to do, and you love your job for the freedom that it allows you to do the things you want to do. So just wondering about your next step that's on your mind.
So, yeah, thank you. I mean, now I'm in more of an administrator role now as associate dean, so that does take up my time, I really love it in the sense that it's a different kind of work. It allows me to work with people, work with faculty across, and it's more about supporting their work and their success than necessarily my success, which is what being a lone faculty member is. Like, how much do I publish here? That's not important. It's like, how much do these guys publish? How many grants do they get? So that's a change in role. In terms of my research and thinking, if you look up on my website, this whole work that we've been doing around the 5 spaces for design, I think I'm really very happy about that work. I think it is good work because it says it takes design from, like, when we think about design, we think about designing an artifact, right? With a pen or an iPhone app or whatever, right? And it says that design actually plays out in education in many different ways. So you have artifacts, you have processes, right? a lesson plan is a process, right? And then, so TPACK framework is actually artifact plus process, technology plus some process for learning. But that's not enough. What you're designing as an educator is the nature of the experience. So there is an aesthetic quality to it. There is, how do you like really get students to engage? And so that's, now you're designing an experience. Above that, you're designing systems. Systems can be anything from your class schedule to admission systems, so on, right? And then finally, what you're designing is culture. And so when you think about education, my interest has increasingly gone from, if you think about it, from engineering to design to TPACK to whatever, has gone across that. And I now am much more interested in how you design systems and culture. And those are really complicated things because human emotions and histories and all of those things are involved. So I end up having to learn a lot about things that I hadn't thought much about like organizational structures, about power, about voice and inequities, and but still you are trying to design organizations or groups of people in ways that support growth and learning. So that's where mentally I am right now.
Thank you for sharing. Sounds like a really fun, long way, but really fun.
Older, you do different things. That's all there is to it, right? So.
Thank you.
Well, Punya, it's been delightful.
Absolutely, Kurt. Thank you.
As I mentioned, Renee is my TA here. I have two TAs actually. Dono's is my other one, and it's great to have them help me out, or I wouldn't survive this semester. It's been a hard one. And so I want to thank everyone for coming in here tonight. If we could all wave goodbye to Punya and thank him. And I will stop the recording at this point to the